Welcome to the Visible Art of Translation podcasts. This series of podcasts are part of the EU-funded INCREC project. Our focus is creativity, translation and technology in literary and audiovisual translation. Our goal with this series is to give visibility to the often invisible skills, role and voice of professional translators.
Hello, Karolina. Welcome to our podcast.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to be here.
Karolina is a literary translator from Norwegian to Polish and a literary scholar. They have published over 120 translations, including books by Jens Bjørneboe, Lars Mytting, Nina Lykke, and Marie Aubert. They are a member of Polish Literary Translators Association and won Norlas Translators Award in 2021. In 2014, they defended their doctoral dissertation on Jens Bjørneboe's epic theatre and now work as an associate professor in the Nordic literature section at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. Their academic interests include, among others, US Norwegian prose, as well as the theory and practice of translation. They love teaching and their students. Welcome again, Karolina. Nice to see you here.
Yes, thank you for having me. I think it's very nice to be invited and talk about what I do.
So let's first start talking about you. How did you decide to become a translator? What brought you here?
I kind of always wanted to work with books. When I was a child, I used to read a lot and really enjoy reading. And I had this dream of getting a job where I could read books and get paid for it. So that was a goal as far as I can remember. And then I started studying Scandinavian studies in Gdańsk in Poland and chose Norwegian as my leading language. So it became a goal to translate from Norwegian. And then something strange happened. And I think it's a singularity when it comes to the Polish book market. I haven't heard about a similar phenomenon on other book markets, but around the year 2008, 2009, Norwegian, I don't know what the proper English term is, but in Norwegian it's called kiosklitteratur, which is kiosk literature. Those are the novels that come in a very long series of maybe 40 or 50 volumes that you buy for €5 at a kiosk before you go on a train. And that became immensely popular in Poland, like crazy popular. So the publishers started translating and giving out those titles in very large numbers. So the demand was much higher than the supply when it comes to literary translators. So publishers would call universities that offered Scandinavian studies and they would ask, do you have any students that could translate some books for us? And that's how I got my first translator's job. Actually, I applied because I wanted to translate, and then the publisher said, no, you don't have any experience. But I was going to Norway to take a year off and go to the Norwegian Folkehøyskole, which is like a folk high school. And the publisher said, okay, when you come back, then take contact with us again, and then maybe we can start something. So I did that. That's how I got my first translator's job, and that was in late 2008, I think. And that's when I started translating Norwegian books, and I haven't stopped ever since. And eventually I graduated from this kiosk literature to more ambitious titles. But at the same time, I would just like to say and stress, because I think it's important, that I do not perceive translating popular literature as inferior compared to translating, for example, Jens Bjørneboe. Those are two very different things, and you work in two very different ways. But I'm kind of irritated by a certain classism that you see on the translators markets, like translators saying that, oh no, you should only translate high literature, you should only translate, I don't know, Goethe and Shakespeare. And if you do anything popular, that's kind of below what deserves respect. I think every translator's job deserves respect. And I learned so much from translating popular literature. I don't think I would be here today talking to you if it wasn't for a lot of popular literature I have translated in my days.
It really resonates with me when you are talking about how different literature is perceived, because I also started my career with translating many crime novels, and I first thought that it was not a real literature, which, yeah, I think it's still an experience which we get. And
Yeah, I mean, and here it opens for a discussion. Only yesterday, I had a lecture with my first year students, and we discussed what is literature. And we ended up with concluding that what is literature is very relevant and very subjective. So, what is high translation? What is low translation? This is also very subjective. So I think that translators as a work group should give each other a break and just respect each other what they do, because a translator that does popular literature deserves the same amount of respect and good work conditions as someone who translates, let's say, Bjørneboe in the Norwegian context, or Knausgård or Jon Fosse. And I could go on about it because I was on the board of the Polish Translators Association for a number of years, and I perceive myself as a translation activist in addition to being a translator. So this is something I have a lot of feelings about.
yeah, I agree. So you mentioned that you started with translating this kiosk literature, you said. Did you mean also crime novels or just popular literature in general?
Well, I started with translating kiosk literatur, which is a specific genre in the Norwegian popular literature. Those are very, how do I describe it? Those are love novels in very many volumes. And even though there are very many different cycluses of those novels, I could probably define some characteristic features. They were usually set in the 19th century, usually in the countryside. There was usually a female protagonist, and everything evolved around the protagonist falling in love and their love kind of story. So I did that, and I did perhaps 60 books within that genre. And then I kind of graduated, or then I started getting other offers from other publishers. So the next step was crime, which on the Norwegian Polish translators book market is ranked as a higher shelf than the kiosk literature. So I did some crime, and then I was very lucky because I was invited to a Norla conference. Norla is an organization in Norway which supports literary translation from Norwegian to other languages, and they organize seminars for translators. So I was invited to one of their seminars, and I met a more experienced translator to Polish. Her name is Ewa Bilińska, and we started talking, and I'm a big fan of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. The listeners cannot see it, but I'm actually wearing a t-shirt that says Bad Seed today. And Eva and I started talking, and it turned out that she's also a fan of Nick Cave. And we kind of started chatting, and we kind of got friendly. And then she recommended me for a publisher that she had been working with. So thanks to Nick Cave and thanks to this wonderful kind of set of circumstances, I got to translate Lush Meetings from Madame Somdrukne, which is published in English as The 16 Trees of the Somme, I think. And that was a very ambitious project. So that was basically my first ambitious project. It was very difficult. I spent a lot of time on it. And apparently both the publisher and the readers liked it, because that kind of opened a gate for me. And then I started getting a lot of offers from different publishers with books from all of the different shelves, like a very high shelf or a lower shelf. I think, like, when students ask me how does one enter the market, I say that it's a combination of capabilities. You have to be a good translator, but this is not enough. You have to be very persistent. Sometimes it takes a lot of years before you get on the market, and then it's luck. Because how I got to translate the meeting book, it was pure luck. I was sat at a table at a dinner party next to someone who could help me and who for some reason liked me. So yeah, it shows that the translators world is kind of chaotic, and that there are actually no laws governing this world. And that's what makes it challenging, but I think that's also what makes it very interesting.
Yeah, so in your career, you translated so many different books and genres, but I wanted to ask you, what was the most memorable work for you? Or maybe several of them?
I think the meeting novel I have just named, Madame Sondrukne, which is the 16 Trees of the Somme, because it was a first big challenge for me. And also because I was translating it at a very specific point in my life and under very specific circumstances. I was sitting in California back then, and I felt that I was a long way away from all of my worlds, both geographically, but also kind of in terms of time, because California is, as far as I remember, 9 hours after Europe. So whenever I had to, because I had to consult so many different people when translating this book, including the author himself. Lars Meeting is the world's most wonderful person, and he likes to collaborate with his translators. So I had like an ongoing dialogue with him all of the time. And I asked him questions. What does that mean? Because this book has a lot of very specific vocabulary regarding, for example, trees and tree work. And I would ask him, what does that mean? And he would answer or send me a link to a picture online so that I could see the object that he was describing. That was wonderful. And when I think about translating projects, I very often associate them, or the way I remember them is I remember what happened in my life when I was translating. So, for example, Trude Marstein's book, which is Norwegian, called Så mye hadde jeg, I had so much. I think that's that's the English title. I also translated in a very specific period in my life when I kind of felt my life was falling apart. And it was very interesting because the main character in that book, Monica, her life was also falling apart. So I kind of felt that my life was falling apart together with the main character's life. And I remember Nina Lycke's novel, which is called Fullspredning in Norwegian. I do not remember the English title, but that's
I think it is Natural Causes, as far
Yes,
as
yes,
yeah.
that's correct. And that book has a narrator which who is very frustrated and very neurotic and very angry. And I was translating this book during the pandemic, and a very scary time in my life because it was the pandemic. We had the abortion ban introduced in Poland, and people were going out on the streets demonstrating, even though it was illegal, and people got arrested. And then my parents, both of my parents, got very sick with COVID. And I felt anger and frustration and kind of helplessness, which paradoxically made this translation good, I think, because I kind of channeled the narrator's feelings. And yeah, and then the Jens Bjørneboe Frihetens øyeblikk, The Moment of Freedom, which I translated 2 years-ish ago, that was a very special book for me because Jens Bjørneboe is very important in my life for several reasons. And I had worked so hard to get a Polish publisher interested in this book. And this book, for people who haven't read it, it's very dark. It's like super dark. It's a story about how people are horrible, basically. And then, just as I was supposed to start translating this book, I fell in love. I fell like crazy in love. And I couldn't kind of get in the mindset because I was so happy. And it was very difficult to translate such a horrible book when I was so happy, but I managed somehow. And people say it's an okay translation. So I mainly remember like stages in my life I was translating books in and how they kind of resonated with the books themselves.
So, as I understand, being in a specific mental state also plays an important role for you when you translate, right?
Yeah, it does, because you kind of have to get into the minds of the narrator if you're translating prose, because each book has its own voice, and finding the book's voice and channeling the book's voice, I guess, is the biggest challenge. That's why I usually take a lot of time when I start translating, because I'm like I'm looking for the correct voice, and once I find it, it tends to go a lot faster and a lot easier. And sometimes I'm in a mood or in a state of mind or at a place where in my life where I resonate very well with the book's voice, and sometimes it's the opposite. So for me, at least, it plays a large role. Yeah.
So our podcast is about creativity and creative process. So could you tell me a bit more about how you go about translating a novel? What does your process look like?
Yeah, I have my other job, or maybe translating is my other job because I work at the university, and that's the main source of my income, and that's also what I spend most time doing. So I'm usually at the university or working on university stuff from let's say from 9 to 5. So I do translation in my free time. So it's basically like a hobby I get paid for. That's what I like to call it. And in order for this to work, I have to be quite disciplined because I have a lot of projects, maybe not that many at this point because I try to reduce, but I tend to be quite productive. And in order to be quite productive, I have to be disciplined. So I kind of, when I start a book, it's usually a book that I have already read because I read a lot of books that are coming out as we speak because I do it for my day job basically. So I know what the book is like, kind of, and I can assess the difficulty level of the book. And then I kind of sign a contract with myself. It's not a written contract, but I kind of agree with myself how many pages I'm going to translate per day. And that depends on how difficult I think the book is. At this moment, I'm working on a book that I think it's very difficult. It's Av Måneskin gror det ingenting of Torbjörg Nedreås. I think it's called Nothing Grows in the Moonlight in English. And it's a book from 1947. So the language is very specific. It's kind of archaic for me, at least. And it's a very difficult topic because it's about unwanted pregnancy and how society treats unwanted pregnancy and abortion. So it's a pretty heavy topic. So I agreed with myself that I'm going to translate 5 pages of the original layout a day, and I'm about halfway through. So it works. And I would love to be able to say that I have this very romantic creative process that I'm waiting for the inspiration to kind of shine on me. But I don't have the luxury to wait for the inspiration to shine on me. I have to get the work done, which basically means that I get back from work and then I eat dinner. And then luckily, I have a partner who also works with something creative because they're a musician. So they're usually at rehearsal in the evenings. So I use the time when they're at rehearsal to sit down with my creative thing. And I translate for like 2, 3 hours and then I'm done. So, but this has become a habit of mine. This is something I have been doing for so long. I started in 15 years, I guess, a bit more than 15 years. So this is just a big this has become a part of my daily rhythm, like brushing my teeth or eating dinner. Not very romantic, very sort of positivistic approach to translators' work, but that's how I do it.
So the voice of the book or the translator you mentioned before, do you start hearing it at the moment you read a book first time and then you just translate?
It it varies. Very often it varies. I think because I read a lot of Norwegian literature and then I kind of read books again when I translate them. I think like reading when you just read and reading when you're translating are two very different things. I think like translation is a deeper form of reading. So when I read just to be able to assess if I like the book or if I read for pleasure or if I read to assess if the book can fit for the Polish market, because that's also a part of my work that I collaborate with agents and read books and then recommend them to publishers. I feel like I read superficially and then I do not hear the book's voice in my head. I just know what the book is about and if whether I think it's good or not. But once I start translating, I think I actually have to start translating to start hearing the book's voice in my head. And it's only once I start, and very often I think the first 2 paragraphs is the most difficult part of the book because I kind of have to get into the book's rhythm, into the book's melody, into the book's language. It very often takes a lot of time to translate the first couple of pages. And that's only after those couple of pages that I think I have some control of the voice. And I kind of know how to rewrite this book in Polish.
I was wondering, as you translate from Norwegian to Polish, and I can imagine it can be very different languages and cultures. And also from my personal experience, I know that, for example, in Swedish, a writer can tend to describe body parts more openly or more detailed. Is there something like this happening when you translate? How do you deal with these challenges?
I think the situation is similar to what you described because, especially when you translate sexuality, Norwegian is very straightforward when it comes to the description of body parts or sexual activities. Polish language is more rigid, I guess. And there are also a lot of other challenges when it comes to, for example, language we use to talk about different groups of people. I kind of, because what I have been translating a lot of modern literature, and I kind of profiled myself, or the publishers profiled me as a feminist, queer, specialized translator, which makes sense because that's also how I profile myself privately. And what has been a challenge for me is translating non-binary language, because in Norwegian, when you write about non-binary people, it's the easiest thing in the world. You have the gender-neutral pronoun hen, and that's it. And you don't have to change anything else. Whereas in Polish, Polish is a very gendered language. So both verbs and nouns and adjectives, and basically everything has a gender. So you have to come up with a way to solve this. And the way I have been doing it was I'm consulting other translators from English. For example, there's a wonderful translator on the Polish market called Agazano, and she translates a lot of non-binary language, literary language, from English to Polish. So I'm talking to her, and I'm also talking to the Polish non-binary community, asking them how they describe themselves. Yeah. So I mean, when I am not sure, I ask. And I think that's the most simple answer. But when it comes to what you said, body parts and describing sexuality, I think it's also, and here I'm talking as a translator, but also as a language activist, let's say, it's our job as translators to kind of try to push the boundaries of the language and try to see if we can make them more flexible. Because once we publish something in a book, then it's in the corpus, and then it's something that has been published and that other people can use. So I think that our job as a translators is to kind of broaden the boundaries of what, for example, the Polish language, which is immensely conservative, has to offer. So I try to experiment where I can, and see where it takes me, and sometimes it takes me interesting places.
I think it can be very challenging to persuade a publisher to maybe publish something which expands the boundaries.
It depends on the publisher, because my experience is that there are, especially like small ambitious publishing houses, with people who are not afraid to contra the taboo or challenge the norms, and then it's a bit easier with them.
Let's try to go back a bit again to creativity in translation. As far as I understood, you have very planned approach to how you translate, but what does creativity in translation mean to you?
Well, creativity in translation it depends on the project, I guess, because yes, you have to be creative, but you have to be creative in a way that is loyal to the original text. So you have to find a way to reproduce basically the original text in your target language in a way which is convincing, and in a way which is a nice experience for the reader. So creativity means that you have to come up with a way to offer your reader a book which is a text that gives the same experience as the starting text, but in a different language. And that basically means that you have to work out a set of devices and tools that you complete. And it's like a toolkit, like a literary translator's toolkit that you can kind of reach into and then complete the set that you need. It's like, okay, here I will change the syntax, but here I will preserve the syntax because it's important. So creativity is having this huge set of tools and then knowing which tools you need to reach for. I guess I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how it works in my head.
So talking about tools, do you use any technical tools when you translate? For example, some translation engines or some programs?
I'm not a fan. I know that some literary translators use CAT tools for translating, and I see one very huge advantage of CAT tools. When you're using CAT tools, you basically have the text divided into segments, and that makes sure that nothing gets lost. I had very embarrassing accidents in, I think, two of the books I have translated, where I was translating and then I stood up to get a drink or something else. And I have managed to omit like a short paragraph or a sentence. And then luckily the editor noticed it and told me, come on, you have to fix it. But CAT tools would like make this a non-existent problem. But I don't know. I think there's something dehumanizing about using electronic tools. So I'm not really using anything. The way I work is I have my laptop and I share. I mean, I divide my screen into two parts. And then I have a PDF of the original text on the right, and then I have a Word document on the left. And I kind of translate like that. It's a very old-fashioned way to do it, I guess, but that's what works for me. If I use any, I mean, I use online dictionaries, of course. Luckily, Norwegian online dictionaries, like the Norwegian dictionary, they are very, very good. And then if I don't know what something means or I don't know what the Polish equivalent is, I usually do a major research just with Google and the internet. I have recently translated a very specific book. It's called Davi var Ingre of Oliver Lawrensky, When We Were Younger. I think that's the English title. And it's a book written in a very specific language, which is kind of stylized as a slang of young Oslo narcos, I would say. And then there was a lot of language there that I did not understand, even though there was a small dictionary in the Norwegian original at the back. So I just did a major Google search and I would swipe internet fora and different places. And then if I get really stuck on something, we have Facebook group for literary translators into Polish. And I go there and I ask a question. And those people there, they are amazing. They are amazing because they have a great knowledge and they're also amazing because they are nerds and they love nerding about what they know. So I would go there with the strangest questions about weapon, gardening, photography, and I would almost always get a very precise answer. So that's like a hive brain of the Polish translators world, this one Facebook group, and I love it. And I often go there for help. But when it comes to the electronic sources, that's basically the only things I use. Everything else I don't trust, or there is this huge discussion on whether AI is going to replace literary translators. I don't believe that this is going to happen unless we develop an AI that has a human conscious, but then we're done as a humankind anyway. I have seen Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick too many times not to believe that if we make AI that has human conscious, it's not going to kill us. And then it doesn't matter anyway. But seriously, I'm not afraid, even though I know of some instances where literary translators have been asked not to translate, but to post-edit a machine translation. But I think the publishers will soon understand that this is not the way to go because post-editing after AI takes so much time and so much effort that it often costs more than the actual translation. So I am optimistic, especially when it comes to literary devices as irony or humor or intertextuality. I don't think AI is going to get that right. At least I hope so. I'm saying this because I hope so. But I'm not a fan of using advanced technologies when I translate. I know some people translate a sentence that they think is difficult, and then they ask ChatGPT to translate the same sentence just to see what ChatGPT is going to produce. I'm not a fan of that, because I believe, like, my ideology is that you should feed ChatGPT as less as you can, because if you prompt ChatGPT and feed it more data, it will have more data, and then it will become more powerful. Just a short comment, just to finish this very long answer to your question. My colleague who was translating the Lawrence book, the Narcos book, to Dutch, we kind of collaborated a little bit. And what he did was that whenever he miss or he didn't understand something, he would ask ChatGPT, "Hey, ChatGPT, can you translate this into proper Norwegian or explain what that means?" And then ChatGPT would come up with answers, but those answers were very often wrong, or they were the ChatGPT was making things up, like, completely. So we went through those answers together, and we concluded that that this is completely unreliable, and that's why I'm skeptical.
There is also this tendency on the Dutch market, for example, when we talk about translating from English to Dutch, that it can be done with machine translation, but maybe it's because the languages are closer together.
I hope that's not ever going to be the case.
Yeah, me too. So you kind of answered several of my questions at once, I think, which is a great thing. I was just I was also thinking about AI and human translation in terms of who is the author of the translation then. And as I read in one of your interviews, that one of the slogans of Polish Literary Translators Association is that a translator is also a writer. So I was wondering, what does it personally mean to you? Yeah, what do you think about?
It kind of connects to what I said before, that when you are translating, you have to write the book again, but in a different language, and that means that it's your responsibility to convey the voice of the original, but you are kind of conveying this voice in your own words. So, and it is your name that's there, and it's you who takes responsibility for the product. So basically, I like to say that I am the translator, or that I am the author of the translation, because I am giving the reader the text that I have written in another language, of course, conveying the original. So, and we use the slogan that the author is also the translator, that the translator is also the author. We use it because when we started as the Polish Literary Translators Association, the role of the literary translator in Poland was very often not seen the way it should be seen. So it wasn't like a prestigious role. And it's such an important, I mean, we as translators are such an important actor on the book market, because it is us who bring the books to the readers. The readers could not, I mean, not all of them, obviously, but a lot of the readers wouldn't be able to read books if it wasn't for us. Another slogan we have is Shakespeare did not write in Polish. So we bring the world to the Polish reader, and I think it's a big responsibility, and then we deserve a lot of credit for that. And then we also deserve working conditions that kind of convey the work that we put in, and this is something we have been working on for several years. So yeah, and I think it's a global tendency when you look at translations into, for example, English, that that translator's name very often is printed on the front cover. And it's also something that a lot of Polish publishers, especially the smaller ones, are starting to do, because they start to kind of see that the name of the translator very often sells the book as well. I've noticed I've mentioned my colleague Agazano, and her name sells a lot of translations in Poland because people know that she is good and that she offers quality. And I could name a lot of other colleagues whom publishers want to have on the front cover because they know that their name will sell the book, maybe not to the same degree as the author's name, but it will definitely contribute.
It's a great tendency, and with this podcast, we also try to make our profession more visible. So I think it's very important. Thank you. I think we can finish at this human-centered point in our podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been great fun.
Thank you again to our invited speaker, and to our listeners. Thank you for being there, and feel free to share our podcasts with your family, friends, and colleagues. This is part of a series of podcasts of the EU-funded INCREC project. So follow us for more episodes, and please share your comments on this platform. See you next time.